Ready?
Yes.
My name is Andrew Lawson, and I intend to prove that nuclear power plants are a safe and viable alternative to fossil fuel-based energy production. I think the three most controversial issues is that a large section of the population believes that they're unsafe, and I think that they have concerns over how material is stored and whether there are risks from radiation. I think that their reputation as being unsafe is undeserved. There have been very few serious nuclear power plant accidents in the last 50 years, and the International Nuclear Event Scale classifies a serious accident as one in which a significant release of radioactive material is released. There have only been 3 such events in the history of nuclear power plants. One in Chernobyl in 1986, one in Kishim in 1957, and much more recently, the one in Fukushima Daiichi in 2011. The most serious event in the United States was the partial meltdown of 3 Mile Island. There were no deaths, and a 1990 study concluded that there was no convincing evidence that radiation releases from this incident increased cancer risk in the surrounding areas. Despite this, nuclear power still holds a negative connotation in the public's mind. I propose that this is primarily because of media coverage. Nuclear power plant incidents, such as the recent meltdown of the Fukushima plant, receive excessive media coverage, especially when compared to their actual impacts. In addition, in 1979, shortly after the partial meltdown of 3 Mile Island, a film was released called The China Syndrome, which capitalized on the public's fear of nuclear power. From a purely statistical standpoint, nuclear power safety also compares favorably with almost all other means of energy production. A study by the National Center for Nuclear Safety and Radiation Control compared the environmental and health impacts of various electricity generating systems. They did so by comparing the number of fatalities with each system to the units of electricity generated. Nuclear power generation was estimated to cause 0.01 deaths per gigawatt per year. Comparatively, coal and oil were estimated at 0.32 and 0.36 deaths per gigawatt per year. That's more than 30 times higher than nuclear power. The same study estimated long-term deaths due to radiation after the Chernobyl incident, which is widely regarded as the worst release of radioactive material. The study concluded that those exposed to radiation after Chernobyl showed only a 0.3% increase in cancer risk over the general population. A study from the NASA Goddard Institute, published just last week, estimated that the use of nuclear power has prevented 1.8 million deaths when compared to predicted deaths if that electricity had been produced by fossil fuels. On top of all this, nuclear power is getting safer. All of these statistics go back to the 1950s. All of the most major issues, with the exception of the Fukushima Daiichi plant, happened prior to 1975. All major incidents such as Fukushima, Chernobyl, and 3 Mile Island occurred in outdated reactors built prior to 1975. There are modern designs which are much less fallible. There exists a design known as the pebble bed reactor, which is self-limiting and passively safe. If it is in danger of overreacting, it will cool itself down without any intervention or fallible mechanism. Such reactors have no risk of catastrophic meltdown. The only danger they pose is low-level emissions. A study by the Institute of Atomic Energy in 2003 compared the expected loss of life per terawatt hour of electricity generated to other means of electricity generation, and concluded that only hydroelectric and wind power pose the lower risk, with coal and fuel posing risks many dozens of times higher. I think overall, it is reasonable to say that nuclear power is a safe alternative to fossil fuels.
All right, Andrew, the claim is stated clearly. It does have two parts to it, so you actually have multiple claims in the proposition. The secondary issues are labeled very effectively, but they're not really stated as claims for the most part. In the body of the speech, though, I do think you make inferences on those points, and that's helpful. There's no doubt there's controversy on this issue. It did feel a little bit like you got sidetracked onto the issue of why people perceive this, and there's almost an argument here suggesting that there's media bias against nuclear power plants, and that almost becomes the focus of your argument. But I think ultimately you do a pretty good job focusing on the safety issues. The signposting on the points as you got to them were pretty clear, and I did think that the transition, for instance, to the second point about the new power plants being safer, I thought that was also pretty good. I think the key issue in your argument is the argument on risk factors in comparison to other forms of energy, and I think that gives you a little bit of a leg up on those particular points. The evidence that you cite is pretty good. You do give us source citations for most of those points, although there were a couple of pieces of factual data early on that I didn't think that you provided that source of information for, but for the most part you did a good job, especially in the later half of the speech. The inferences seem pretty reasonable. Your audience contact is solid. It did seem like at the beginning of the speech you suggested there was going to be some argument about waste issues and storage issues, but I never heard anything developed on that particular point. I did think at the end of the speech that you had a very clear exit line, and that leaves us effectively at the end of the presentation hearing the point of view that you're making. So I thought that worked well. All right, thank you.